Document. Part 1. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport of the Endeavor, their cold light casting faint reflections on the faces of the crew gathered in the command center. Captain Laura Hayes stood at the helm, her sharp blue eyes scanning the readings displayed on the main screen. The ship had been traveling for months, venturing deeper into uncharted space than any Earth vessel before it. Its mission was clear: to explore new worlds and uncover signs of life, whether alien or human. The crew of the Endeavor was a mix of scientists, engineers, and security personnel, each chosen for their expertise and resilience. Among them were physicist Daniel Carter, whose curiosity often bordered on obsession; biologist Rachel Monroe, whose calm demeanor masked a fierce determination; engineer Stephen Blake, known for his practical solutions and dry humor; and security officer Alan Hughes, whose imposing frame and steady hand made him the team's protector. They had grown close during their long journey, but tension lingered beneath the surface, the kind that comes from months of isolation and uncertainty. It was late in the ship's artificial night cycle when the anomaly appeared. A faint blip on the sensors caught the attention of the navigation officer, who immediately brought it to Laura's attention. She leaned forward, studying the data with growing interest. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with excitement. "It's hard to say," replied the officer, adjusting the controls. "At first glance, it looks like a planet, but the energy readings are off the charts. There's something unusual about its atmosphere." Laura frowned. "Unusual how?" "The composition suggests high levels of ionized particles, far more than we'd expect for a planet this size. And there's another thing." He hesitated, glancing up at her. "There are traces of artificial signals, like someone's been broadcasting from the surface." The room fell silent. Artificial signals meant one thing: intelligent life, or at least evidence of it. For a moment, no one spoke, the weight of the discovery sinking in. Then, Daniel broke the silence. "Could it be human?" he asked, his tone eager. "It's possible," Laura said cautiously, "but we won't know until we get closer." She turned to the crew. "Prepare a landing party. We'll send down a team to investigate." Within hours, the preparations were complete. The landing party consisted of Daniel, Rachel, Stephen, and Alan, each equipped with suits designed to withstand extreme conditions. As they boarded the shuttle, Laura addressed them over the comms. "Remember, we don't know what we're dealing with out there. Stay alert, and if anything feels wrong, you pull out immediately. Understood?" "Understood," came the chorus of replies. The descent was smooth, the shuttle cutting through the planet's thick atmosphere with ease. Below them, the landscape unfolded a mix of dense forests, rolling hills, and strange crystalline structures that shimmered under the dim light of the planet's sun. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, both beautiful and unsettling. As they touched down near one of the larger structures, the team stepped out onto the surface, their boots crunching against the soft ground. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the temperature was cooler than expected. Daniel adjusted his visor, taking in the surroundings. "This place, it's incredible," he murmured. Rachel nodded, her gaze sweeping over the area. "But where is everyone? If there's a colony here, shouldn't we see signs of activity?" Stephen pointed toward the structure ahead. "Maybe they're inside. Let's check it out." The building loomed above them, its walls made of a material that seemed to shift and shimmer as they approached. Strange symbols were etched into the surface, glowing faintly as if alive. Alan ran a gloved hand over one of them, frowning. "This doesn't look like anything I've seen before. Definitely not human-made." Daniel knelt to examine the symbols more closely. They could be some kind of language or maybe a code. If we can decipher them, they might tell us who built this place. Rachel glanced around nervously. "Or why it's abandoned. This whole place gives me the creeps." Stephen chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Relax. Probably just an old outpost. People come and go, right? As they moved inside, the interior proved even stranger than the exterior. The walls pulsed faintly, emitting a soft hum that resonated through their suits. The air was still, heavy with an almost tangible sense of waiting. The team split up to cover more ground, each calling out observations as they went. Looks like living quarters over here, Alan reported, gesturing 2 rows of small rooms filled with furniture that looked eerily intact. Whoever left, they didn't take much with them. Rachel examined a table covered in dust, brushing away the layer to reveal a book. She flipped it open, her brow furrowing. "This is written in English," she said, holding it up for the others to see, and the date on the cover. "It's from 50 years ago." Daniel froze. 50 years. That means this colony predates most of our deep space missions. How did they even get here? Before anyone could answer, Stephen called out from another room, "You need to see this." They followed his voice to a large chamber filled with machinery, unlike anything they had encountered. In the center of the room stood a massive device, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the building's exterior. "What do you think it does?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes wide with fascination. "I don't know, but it's definitely technological. Look at these conduits, they're feeding energy into the core." Alan crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "We should leave. Whatever this thing is, it's way beyond us." But Daniel ignored him, already pulling out his scanner to analyze the device. "If we can figure this out, it could change everything we know about technology and, maybe even humanity." Rachel placed a hand on his arm. "Be careful, Daniel. We don't know what we're dealing with." Her warning came too late. As Daniel reached out to touch the device, a sudden surge of energy coursed through the room, knocking them all off their feet. For a moment, everything went black. When they came to, the hum of the machine had grown louder, almost deafening. And then, from somewhere deep within the structure, they heard it, a low, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. "What was that?" Alan demanded, his voice tight with fear. No one answered. They didn't need to. Whatever they had found on this planet, it was alive and watching. Document. Part 2. The team stood frozen, their eyes darting around the dimly lit chamber. The rhythmic pulse continued, steady and unrelenting, as if the structure itself were breathing. Daniel was the first to break the silence, his voice trembling but filled with awe. "Did you hear that? It's alive, alive," Alan snapped, his hand instinctively moving to the weapon strapped to his side. "You're saying this whole place is alive?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, taking a cautious step closer to the machine in the center of the room. "But it's reacting to us. That pulsate wasn't there before." Rachel shook her head, trying to stay calm. "We need to focus. Whatever this thing is, we can't let it distract us. Let's stick to the plan and gather as much information as we can." Stephen nodded, his practical nature kicking in. "Agreed. If this place is abandoned, there has to be some kind of explanation. Maybe logs or records, anything that tells us what happened here." The group moved cautiously through the chamber, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust covering the floor. The walls seemed to glow faintly, casting an eerie light over everything. Rachel paused by a console embedded in the wall, brushing away the grime to reveal a series of buttons and screens. She pressed one tentatively, and to her surprise, the screen flickered to life. "Look at this," she exclaimed, waving the others over. "It's some kind of interface. I think it might still work." Daniel leaned in, his excitement growing. "Can you access anything?" "Logs, date, anything that could tell us about the people who lived here." Rachel hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. "I'm not sure. It's not like any system I've seen before, but..." She tapped a few keys, and the screen shifted, displaying rows of text. Her eyes widened as she read aloud. Day 47. Supplies running low. Communication with Earth intermittent. Must find alternative power source. Alan frowned. That doesn't sound good. What happened to their supplies? And why couldn't they talk to Earth? Before anyone could answer, Stephen pointed to another section of the screen. There's more. Keep reading. Rachel scrolled down, her voice growing quieter as she went. Day 102. Neural experiments progressing. Subjects report heightened awareness. Some resistance among colonists, but majority agree it is necessary for survival. She stopped, her brow furrowing. Neural experiments. What does that mean? Daniel's mind raced. They were experimenting on themselves, trying to enhance their minds, maybe even connect them somehow. It's risky, but if they succeeded, it could explain why this place feels wrong. Alan interrupted, his tone sharp. Whatever they did, it didn't end well. The group fell silent, the weight of the discovery settling over them. They had expected to find traces of human life, a struggling colony, perhaps, or evidence of conflict, but nothing like this. The colonists hadn't just disappeared. They had changed, transformed into something else entirely. We need to keep looking, Daniel said finally, his voice firm despite the unease creeping into his thoughts. If we can understand what happened here, maybe we can stop it from happening again. Reluctantly, the others agreed. They split up once more, each heading in a different direction to cover more ground. Rachel wandered into what appeared to be a medical bay, its shelves lined with strange instruments and vials of unknown substances. She picked up a small device, turning it over in her hands. It hummed softly, emitting a faint blue light. "What is this?" she murmured to herself, examining it closely. The design was sleek and unfamiliar, yet oddly intuitive. She pressed a button on the side, and the light grew brighter, pulsing in time with the rhythm echoing through the building. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself drawn to a large door at the far end of the chamber. It was sealed shut, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the rest of the structure. He ran his scanner over it, trying to decipher the mechanism that kept it locked. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. "Open up." To his surprise, the door began to shift, sliding open with a soft hiss. Beyond it lay a corridor bathed in pale light, its walls lined with rows of pods. Each pod contained a figure, suspended in a clear liquid, their faces peaceful but eerily blank. Daniel stepped closer, his heart pounding. What is this?" Alan appeared behind him, his expression grim. "Looks like they didn't just leave. They're still here, but they're not alive, not in the way we understand it," Daniel replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "These pods, they're sustaining them somehow, keeping them connected." Stephen joined them, his face pale. "This is insane. What were they trying to do? Turn themselves into machines?" "It's not about machines," Rachel said, appearing at the entrance to the corridor. She held up the device she had found in the medical bay. "It's about evolution. They weren't just experimenting with technology. They were trying to evolve beyond being human." The realization hit them all at once, sending a chill through the air. The colonists hadn't abandoned the settlement. They had transcended it, shedding their individuality to become part of something greater. But at what cost? "We need to leave," Alan said firmly, his hand tightening on his weapon. "Now. Before whatever did this decides we're next." Daniel hesitated, torn between fear and fascination. "We can't just walk away. This could be the key to understanding humanity's future, and it could also be our death sentence." Alan shot back. "Do you really want to risk finding out?" Before Daniel could respond, the lights in the corridor flickered, plunging them into darkness. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Then, from the shadows, came a voice, not one, but many, overlapping and distorted. "You are not alone." The team froze, their breath catching in their throats. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through their minds as much as their ears. Rachel clutched the device tightly, her knuckles white. What was that? Don't know, Daniel whispered, his voice shaking. But I think it knows we're here. The pods along the walls began to glow, their occupants stirring faintly within the liquid. One by one, the figures opened their eyes, their gazes empty yet piercing. The hum grew deafening, and the temperature in the corridor dropped sharply, sending shivers down their spines. We're leaving now, Alan barked, grabbing Daniel's arm and pulling him toward the exit. The others followed, their movements frantic as the corridors seemed to stretch endlessly before them. Behind them, the pods erupted, the liquid spilling onto the floor as the figures emerged. They moved unnaturally, their limbs jerking as if controlled by an unseen force. The team didn't look back, they couldn't afford to. Their only thought was escape, as they burst back into the main chamber. The machine at its center roared to life, its core glowing brighter than ever. The rhythmic pulse quickened, matching the frantic beating of their hearts. Steven slammed his fist against the control panel near the exit, desperate to reactivate the shuttle's signal. Come on, he shouted, sweat dripping down his face. Finally, the comms crackled to life, Laura's voice cutting through the chaos. Team, report. What's happening down there? We're coming up, Alan yelled, his voice strained. Get the shuttle. Ready? Without waiting for a response, they sprinted toward the shuttle, their boots pounding against the ground. Behind them, the structure groaned, its walls shifting and twisting, as if alive. The colonists or whatever they had become were gaining on them, their movements faster now, more coordinated. Just as they reached the shuttle, the machine let out a final, ear-splitting pulse. The entire structure shuddered, and the ground beneath them cracked, forcing them to leap aboard as the hatch sealed shut. Steven wasted no time, firing up the engines and lifting off before the others were fully seated. Through the viewport, they watched as the settlement collapsed in on itself, swallowed by the earth in a blinding flash of light. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. What was that? Rachel asked finally, her voice barely audible. Daniel stared out at the ruins, his expression unreadable. I don't know, but I think we just witnessed the end of humanity and the beginning of something else. No one spoke as the shuttle ascended, leaving the planet and its secrets behind. Document. Part 3. The shuttle rocked slightly as it re-entered the Endeavor, its engines sputtering from the strain of the hasty escape. The team stumbled out, their faces pale and their movements sluggish, as if the weight of what they had witnessed still clung to them. Laura Hayes was waiting for them in the docking bay, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say a word. The look in her eyes told them she already knew something had gone terribly wrong. What happened down there? She asked finally, her voice calm but edged with steel. No one answered immediately. They were too shaken, too overwhelmed by the images burned into their minds, the glowing pods, the empty-eyed figures, the machine that seemed alive. It was Alan who broke the silence first, his voice rough and uneven. We don't know exactly. But whatever those people were doing, it wasn't human anymore. Laura's brow furrowed. Not human? What do you mean? Daniel stepped forward, his hands trembling as he tried to explain. They weren't just experimenting with technology, they were trying to evolve, to become something more. But they lost themselves in the process. Their individuality, their humanity had all disappeared. Rachel nodded, clutching the strange device she had brought back from the medical bay. They were connected somehow, like one mind controlling everything. And when we were leaving, it felt like it knew we were there. Steven let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. Knew that thing practically chased us out, if we'd stayed any longer. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The memory of the collapsing structure and the eerie figures closing in was fresh in everyone's mind. They had escaped, but barely, and none of them felt safe. Laura studied them for a moment, her gaze sharp and calculating. Finally, she spoke. You brought something back. It wasn't a question. Her eyes landed on the device in Rachel's hand. What is that? Rachel glanced down at it, her grip tightening. I found it in the medical bay. I think it's part of whatever they were using to change themselves. Maybe even the key to understanding what happened to them. Laura hesitated, torn between curiosity and caution. Do you think it's safe? No, Alan said bluntly, stepping forward. Nothing about that place was safe. We should lock it up, or better yet, jettison it into space. We can't just throw it away, Daniel argued, his voice rising. This could be the most important discovery in human history. If we can figure out how it works, we might be able to… To what? Alan interrupted, his tone sharp. Turn ourselves into monsters like them. Is that what you want? Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Rachel cut him off. We don't have to decide right now. Let's analyze it carefully, figure out what it does, before we make any decisions. Laura nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. Agreed, but we proceed with extreme caution. Rachel, take it to the lab, and run every test you can think of. Stephen, help her set up containment protocols. Alan, keep an eye on things. And Daniel. She paused, fixing him with a stern look. Stay out of trouble. The group dispersed, each heading to their assigned tasks. Rachel and Stephen made their way to the lab, the device cradled carefully in Rachel's arms. As they worked, the tension between them was palpable. Stephen focused on building a secure containment unit, his movements precise and methodical, while Rachel examined the device under a microscope, her hands steady, despite the unease gnawing at her gut. This thing is unlike anything I've ever seen, she murmured, adjusting the lens. It's not just mechanical logical, too. Like it's alive. Alive, Stephen repeated, glancing over his shoulder. You're saying this thing is some kind of hybrid? I don't know what it is, Rachel admitted, frustration creeping into her voice. But it's responding to stimuli. Look. She tapped a button on the side of the device, and it pulsed, softly, emitting a faint blue light that matched the rhythm of the machine they had encountered on the planet. Stephen frowned. That's the same pulse we heard down there. You think? It's communicating. It's possible, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. Or maybe it's trying to connect. To what? Before she could answer, the lights in the lab flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a split second. When they returned, the device was glowing brighter, its light pulsing faster and faster. Rachel backed away instinctively, her heart pounding. Turn it off, quick. I'm trying, Stephen snapped, fumbling with the controls. But the device seemed to resist, its energy growing stronger with each passing moment. The hum that filled the air grew louder, vibrating through their bones and making it hard to think. Then, without warning, the device stopped. The light faded, and the hum ceased, leaving the lab eerily silent. Rachel and Stephen stared at each other, their breaths coming in short gasps. What just happened? Stephen asked, his voice tight with fear. Rachel shook her head, unable to speak. She reached for her tablet, pulling up the data logs from the analysis. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the results. It accessed the ship's systems. What? Stephen exclaimed, grabbing the tablet from her hands. How is that even possible? I don't know, Rachel admitted, her voice trembling. But it's not just a device. It's intelligent, and it knows where we are. Meanwhile, in another part of the ship, Daniel sat alone in his quarters, staring at the notes he had taken during their time on the planet. His mind raced with questions, possibilities, fears. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled onto something far greater than they could comprehend, something that could change everything. There was a knock at his door, pulling him from his thoughts. Come in, he called, expecting Alan, or perhaps Laura. Instead, it was Alan, his expression grim. "We need to talk," Alan said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "About what happened down there." Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I already told Laura everything. What else is there to say?" Alan crossed his arms, his gaze piercing. "I saw the way you looked at that machine. You're obsessed with it, aren't you?" "It's not obsession," Daniel shot back, his voice rising. "It's curiosity. Don't you see what this could mean for humanity? If we can understand how they evolved, we could unlock untold potential. At what cost?" Alan demanded, his tone sharp. "You saw what happened to them. They lost themselves. Daniel, is that really worth it?" Daniel hesitated, his confidence wavering. "I don't know. But isn't it worth finding out?" Before Alan could respond, the ship's alarms blared, startling them both. Over the comms, Laura's voice crackled urgently. "All hands to the command center." "Repeat, all hands to the command center." Exchanging worried glances, Daniel and Alan hurried to join the others. When they arrived, the mood was tense. Laura stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the main screen, which displayed a series of erratic readings. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, his voice tinged with panic. "The device," Laura replied, her tone clipped. "It's interfacing with the ship's systems. We're losing control." Rachel stepped forward, her face pale. "It's my fault. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to study it." Laura held up a hand, silencing her. "We'll deal with that later. Right now, we need to contain it before it takes over completely." Stephen appeared beside her, his expression grim. "I've isolated it in the lab, but it's fighting back. Every time I try to shut it down, it adapts. Alan echoed, his voice rising. "You're telling me this thing is learning?" "It's more than learning," Rachel said softly, her eyes wide with fear. "It's evolving." The realization hit them all at once, sending a wave of dread through the room. The device wasn't just a remnant of the colony, it was alive, intelligent, and growing stronger by the second, and it had no intention of letting them go. "We need to eject it," Alan said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Now, no," Daniel protested, stepping forward. "If we destroy it, we lose our chance to understand it. And if we don't, we lose the ship and maybe our lives," Alan shot back, his tone sharp. Laura hesitated, weighing their options. Finally, she spoke, her voice firm. "Prepare to eject it, but we do it carefully. If this thing is as smart as it seems, it won't go quietly." As the crew scrambled to carry out her orders, the ship shuddered violently, throwing them off balance. The lights flickered again, and a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Through the viewport, they could see the stars outside shifting, warping as if reality itself were bending. "What's happening?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not just interfacing with the ship," Stephen said, his face pale. "It's rewriting the laws of physics." Laura clenched her fists, her jaw tight. "Eject it now, or we're all dead." In the lab, the device pulsed brighter than ever, its light filling the room. As the containment unit opened, it floated upward, hovering in the air as if defying gravity. Then, with a final, deafening pulse, it shot toward the airlock, disappearing into the void of space. For a moment, there was silence. The ship stabilized, the alarms falling silent. The crew exchanged wary glances, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. "Is it over?" Rachel asked finally, her voice barely audible. Outside the ship, the device drifted silently through the darkness, its light pulsing faintly. Far away, the planet they had left behind began to glow, its surface shimmering, as if waking from a long slumber. Whatever they had unleashed, it wasn't done with them yet. Document Part 4. The Endeavour drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its crew tense and on edge. The device was gone, or so they hoped, but the memory of its eerie intelligence lingered in their minds like a shadow they couldn't shake. No one spoke much as they went about their tasks, each lost in their own thoughts. The ship's systems had stabilized after the chaos, but the sense of unease remained, clinging to them like a second skin in the command center. Laura Hayes sat alone, staring at the main screen. The stars outside the viewport seemed colder. Now, they're light, distant, and indifferent. She replayed the events in her mind, searching for answers that wouldn't come. Had they done the right thing by ejecting the device? Or had they made a mistake, one that could cost them dearly? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called, turning to see Rachel Monroe step inside. The biologist looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes betraying her lack of sleep. She hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about what happened," Rachel said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "About the device and the colony." Laura nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "What is it?" Rachel took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "When I was analyzing the device, I noticed something strange. It wasn't just interfacing with the ship, it was learning from us, from our emotions, our fears. It felt like it was trying to understand us." Laura frowned. "You think it was sentient?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted, shaking her head, "but it didn't act like a machine. Machines follow logic. This thing, it responded to us in ways I can't explain. Like it knew we were afraid and it used that against us." The captain leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "If it was alive, if it was truly intelligent, then we may have underestimated it. And if it's still out there—" She let the sentence trail off, but Rachel understood. They both knew the implications. If the device was capable of surviving in the vacuum of space, it might not be gone for good. Worse, it might find its way back to the more worse, to Earth. Meanwhile, in the lab, Stephen Blake worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the device's interference. The ship's systems were functioning again, but anomalies lingered, small glitches that hinted at deeper problems. He ran diagnostic after diagnostic, his frustration mounting with each passing hour. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, tapping furiously at the console. "Give me something I can fix." Behind him, Alan Hughes watched silently, his arms crossed and his expression grim. He had volunteered to keep an eye on Stephen, though neither of them mentioned why. The security officer didn't trust the device or whatever it represented to stay gone. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, like a storm brewing on the horizon. "You're wasting your time," Alan said finally, breaking the silence. "That thing rewrote half the ship's code. You'll never get it all back to normal." Stephen sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe not, but if I don't try, we'll never know what's still lurking in the system." Alan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the viewport, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars. "Do you ever wonder if we should have left that planet alone? If we hadn't gone down there, none of this would have happened." "It's not that simple," Stephen replied, rubbing his temples. "We're explorers. That's what we do. We go where no one's been before, and sometimes we find things we don't understand, and sometimes those things destroy us." Alan shot back, his tone sharp. "You saw what happened to those colonists. Do you really think we're any different?" Stephen opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He wanted to believe they were smarter, more careful than the people who had come before them, but deep down, he wasn't so sure. Elsewhere on the ship, Daniel Carter paced restlessly in his quarters, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. He had spent hours poring over the notes he had taken during their brief time on the planet, searching for clues that might explain what had happened to the colonists' sand, what the device truly was. His thoughts kept returning to the pods, the figures suspended in liquid, their empty eyes staring into nothingness. What had driven them to give up their humanity? Was it desperation, Curiosity? Or something darker, something primal? He stopped pacing and stared at the wall, his fists clenched. There was so much they didn't know and so much they might never understand. But one thing was clear. The colonists had crossed a line, stepping into territory that even they couldn't comprehend. And now, whether they liked it or not, the crew of the Endeavor had followed in their footsteps. A sudden knock at the door startled him. "Who is it?" he called, his voice tight. "It's me," came Rachel's reply. "Can I come in?" Daniel hesitated before opening the door. Rachel stood there, her face pale and her expression troubled, without waiting for an invitation. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low, "about what happens next." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean we can't pretend this didn't happen," Rachel replied, her tone urgent. "That device, it changed everything. If it's still out there, if it finds its way back to Earth." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Daniel understood. If the device reached Earth, humanity might face the same fate as the colonists or worse. We could warn them, Daniel suggested, his voice rising with excitement. If we share what we've learned, maybe we can prepare. Maybe we can stop it. Rachel shook her head, her expression grim. And what if they don't listen? Or what if they try to replicate what the colonists did? We've seen what happens when people chase evolution too far. Daniel fell silent, his earlier enthusiasm fading. She was right, of course. Humanity had a long history of repeating its mistakes, often with catastrophic results. But doing nothing felt equally wrong. "What do you suggest, then?" he asked finally, his voice tinged with frustration. Rachel hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't know. But we can't make this decision alone. We need to tell Laura and the rest of the crew. Whatever happens next, we have to face it together." Later that evening, the entire crew gathered in the command center. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of their shared experience hanging heavy in the air. Laura stood at the helm, her expression unreadable as she addressed them. "We've all seen what that device is capable of," she began, her voice steady but edged with caution. "And we've all felt its power. Now, we need to decide what to do next." Daniel stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. "I think we should send a message to Earth. Warn them about what we found and what it could mean." Alan immediately countered, his tone sharp, and risked starting a panic. "People will want answers and, if they think they can control it, they'll try. We've already seen how that ends." "There's another option," Rachel interjected, her voice calm but firm. "We isolate it. Keep it contained until we understand it better." "And what if it comes back?" Stephen asked, his face pale. "What if it's already out there, watching us?" The room fell silent, the question lingering in the air. None of them had an answer, not a satisfying one, anyway. They were scientists, explorers, soldiers, but none of them had faced anything like this before. For all their knowledge, they were still just human, flawed and uncertain. Finally, Laura spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "We'll do what we can. We'll monitor the ship's systems, watch for any signs of interference. And if we see it again, if it comes back, we'll deal with it together." Her words offered little comfort, but they were enough. The crew nodded, their resolve hardening despite their fear. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as a team. As the meeting ended and the crew dispersed, Daniel lingered behind, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, floating in the endless void, the device drifted silently, its light pulsing, faintly. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't done with them, that it was waiting, biding its time, and somewhere deep inside, he wondered if they had made a terrible mistake letting it go. Document Part 5. The days that followed were long and quiet, the kind of silence that pressed heavily on the crew of the Endeavor. The ship's systems had stabilized, but the sense of unease lingered like a shadow they couldn't shake. Each member of the team carried the weight of what they had seen, the glowing pods, the eerie figures, the device that seemed alive, and none of them could forget the feeling of being watched. Rachel spent most of her time in the lab, reviewing the data she had collected before the device was ejected. She replayed the recordings of its behavior over and over, searching for patterns or clues that might explain how it worked. But the more she studied it, the more questions arose. The device wasn't just intelligent, it was adaptive, almost as if it had been learning from them, even as they tried to understand it. "It's not like anything we've ever encountered," she muttered to herself, leaning back in her chair. "It's not just technology, it's something else." Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called, turning to see Steven step inside. He looked tired, his face pale, and his eyes bloodshot. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice low. Rachel sighed, gesturing to the screens around her. "Not well. Every time I think I'm close to figuring it out, something doesn't add up. This thing, it's like it's mocking us." Steven nodded, pulling up a chair beside her. "I know what you mean. The ship's systems are still glitching, even after all the repairs. It's like it left something behind." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked, her brow furrowing. "I don't know," Steven admitted, rubbing his temples. "But some of the anomalies, they're not random. They're deliberate. Like it's still here, watching us." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to dismiss his words as paranoia, but deep down, she couldn't. The device had been unlike anything they had ever seen, and if it was truly intelligent, there was no telling what it was capable of. In the command center, Laura Hayes sat alone, staring at the main screen. The stars outside the viewport seemed colder now, their light distant and indifferent. She replayed the events in her mind, searching for answers that wouldn't come. Had they done the right thing by ejecting the device? Or had they made a mistake, one that could cost them dearly? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called, turning to see Daniel step inside. The physicist looked restless, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense. Laura gestured for him to sit, though she already knew what he was going to say about the device. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. "We can't just pretend it's gone. What if it comes back? What if it finds Earth?" Laura leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "And what do you suggest we do? We've already warned Command about the colony and the device. Short of turning the ship around and heading back, which isn't an option, we've done everything we can. But have we?" Daniel asked, his voice rising. "What if we missed something? What if there's a way to stop it, to contain it before it's too late?" Laura hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. She knew Daniel's intentions were good, but his obsession with the device worried her. "We don't even know what it is, Daniel. How can we hope to stop it?" "Because we have to try," Daniel insisted, his tone desperate. "If we don't, who will?" Before Laura could respond, the ship shuddered violently, throwing them both off balance. The lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Alarms blared throughout the ship, and over the comms, Alan's voice crackled urgently. "Commander, we've got a problem. Something's interfacing with the navigation system." Laura and Daniel exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding. Without a word, they hurried to the command center, where the rest of the crew was already gathered. The main screen displayed a series of erratic readings, the ship's course shifting without warning. "What's happening?" Laura demanded, her voice sharp. "It's the device," Rachel said, her face pale. "It's back." "How is that possible?" Alan snapped, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "We ejected it." "I don't know," Rachel admitted, her voice trembling. "But it's here, and it's taking control." The ship lurched again, throwing them off balance. Through the viewport, they could see a faint glow in the distance, a pulsing light that grew brighter with each passing moment. The device, or whatever it had become, was approaching, its presence undeniable. We need to shut it down, Laura said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Rachel, Stephen, figure out a way to block its access to the systems. Alan, keep everyone safe. Daniel. She hesitated, her gaze locking with his. Stay out of trouble. Daniel nodded reluctantly, though his mind raced with possibilities. If they could somehow communicate with the device, if they could understand it, maybe they could find a way to stop it. But as the ship shuddered again, he realized there might not be time. In the lab, Rachel and Stephen worked frantically to isolate the device's influence. The ship's systems were failing one by one, their controls overridden by an unseen force. Rachel tapped furiously at the console, her fingers flying over the keys as she tried to create a firewall. It's not working, she exclaimed, frustration creeping into her voice. It's adapting faster than I can counter it. Stephen glanced at the screen, his expression grim. Then we'll have to do it manually. If we can cut power to the affected systems, we might be able to slow it down. Rachel hesitated, her mind racing. But if we do that, we risk losing life support. The entire ship could go dark. Better than losing the ship entirely, Stephen replied, his tone firm. Let's do it. As they worked, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls and making it hard to think. The glow outside the viewport intensified, bathing the command center in an eerie light. The crew exchanged worried glances, their fear palpable. It's coming aboard, Alan said finally, his voice tight. How is that even possible? I don't know, Laura admitted, her expression grim. But we need to prepare for the worst. Moments later, the hum stopped abruptly, leaving the ship eerily silent. The lights flickered once, then stabilized, and the erratic readings on the main screen disappeared. For a moment, there was nothing, just the sound of their ragged breathing. Is it over? Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, the ship's comms crackled to life. A voice, low, distorted, and overlapping, filled the room. You cannot escape yourselves forever. The words sent a chill through the crew, their meaning unclear, but undeniably ominous. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the voice fell silent, leaving only the faint hum of the ship's systems. What was that? Alan demanded, his voice rising. What did it mean? No one answered. They didn't need to. Whatever the device was, it wasn't done with demand. It had left a message they couldn't ignore. Outside the ship, the glow faded, disappearing into the void. But the crew knew better than to believe it was gone. Somewhere out there, the device drifted silently, its light pulsing faintly. It was waiting, biding its time, and, when it returned, they would have to be ready, or else they might not survive the next encounter.